Hello, everyone. My name is Madeline Kennedy McFoy, and I work on policy research and advocacy at Education International. EI is a global federation of education unions and represents 32 million teachers in 383 organizations across 178 countries. This year, the theme of International Women's Day is Gender Equality Today for a Sustainable Tomorrow. So I'm having a conversation with two inspiring leaders to discuss their work to advance gender equality and climate justice. Jo Grady is the General Secretary of the University and College Union in the UK. UCU's members are on strike right now over deteriorating employment conditions and pension cuts. Thanks a lot, Jo, for taking the time to be with us today. And please extend our solidarity to all of the higher education union staff who've been striking. Carmela Elaga is a climate activist from the Philippines. Last year, she was named one of the 5 young women and girls fighting for climate justice that you should know by the former First Lady of the US, Michelle Obama. Thanks for joining us today, Carmela. So to begin with, I'd like to ask you both to say a little bit about your current position and the organization that you work for. So maybe we can start with you, Jo.
Yep, thank you. And what esteemed company I am keeping, truly honoured. So I'm the General Secretary of UCU, which is the University and College Union. We are the largest post-16 union in the world, and we represent workers in the UK who work in any kind of post-16 education. So in the UK, that's further education colleges, higher education, but we also represent people who teach in adult education and also who teach people in prisons. So we kind of cover a lot of different types of professionals who work in education and not just teachers. And my role, I have the honour of being the person who is the elected leader of that union. I was elected in 2019. Prior to the election, I worked in education myself as a lecturer at university. So I kind of tread this line between being a member of staff of the union, but the only elected member of staff.
Right, thanks, Jo. And you, Carmela?
Hi, thanks, Madeline. Hi, I'm Carmela. I am working with a local NGO here in the Philippines, which is the Philippine Reef and Rainforest Conservation Foundation. Our work is really on, we are known for our environmental and conservation education program. So basically, our work really focuses on those areas and working together with different stakeholders here. So I am working as a community officer and also as a project officer in our project last year, which is about coastal protection through biodiversity conservation and coastal communities affected by typhoons here in the Philippines.
Lovely. So I'm going to dive straight into it with you both. You're both leaders and you're both young women. Now, we know that that kind of profile hasn't been the traditional profile of people who've held leadership positions. So I want to ask you about what that experience has been like for you. What differences did being a woman and being young make to the journey that you've been on to become a leader? Maybe I can start with you, Carmela.
So there's always challenges when it comes to this kind of line of work that I have. So I am actually a fisheries technologist. I'm working closely with also fisher folks and coastal communities. So this also kind of work is kind of male-dominated kind of sector here in the Philippines or maybe even worldwide. So it's, and also as a young leader in my community, so there's always a challenge, but behind those challenges also, so it's kind of also rewarding for me, and also it's kind of fulfillment seeing, because there's also a lot of young girls in my communities, especially in coastal areas. Now that I think my role as a young leader, as a young woman, being there and also working closely in my community, it's kind of a role model to those who are younger than me, and also even to other women that they can work and do things differently, or do things that men can do also. And so there's challenges and also opportunities as a young woman and as a leader in my community in this kind of work that I have.
Thanks, Carmela. And you, Joe?
I think in trade unions, which, just for the context, have traditionally, not always, but traditionally in the UK context at least, they emerged out of male dominated industries, and they did so, kind of like 100 years ago. And obviously as time has gone by, they've expanded their membership and their campaigning priorities to include women, and also, other kind of marginalized groups, because, trade unions were firmly kind of male and white dominated. So I think it's important that people who are not that category have now started taking greater roles in unions and leading them. And there are other female general secretaries in the UK, but it is rare to have a young woman. There is one other young woman, similar age to me, who's leading a union. And I think it's fair to say that the challenges, I think, are what women in numerous industries face, of not being taken as seriously, or even if you are taken seriously, I think, you get those kind of microaggressions of people trying to diminish your efforts or your achievements, or somehow suggesting that maybe you were lucky. I know when I ran for election of the union, despite the fact that I got my PhD at 25, or my full-time lecturing job at 25, I was called a vanity-driven lightweight, for having the audacity to decide to put myself forward to run the union. So I think you get a lot of people still who are very wedded to or comfortable with the way things used to be. And I think they get quite threatened when they see someone who, in their opinion, should be waiting their turn. And I think that's, in a way, great, because if your audacity and your confidence and your vision for what something should look like and be different threatens people, I think that's good. And I think, we're creating a union, to very similar to what Carmela was saying, people are inspired and people have joined the union and people want to see different campaigning priorities. So I really don't mind if that's the kind of attitude I get from some people.
Yes, you're troubling some very deep structures by being who you are and occupying the positions that you're occupying. So thinking now more specifically about where each of you is located, I'd like to turn to the link between education and climate change. So Joe, I guess you do, but I'm going to ask anyway. Do you think that climate change and climate education should be a priority for the union?
I mean, absolutely, 100%. When I stood for General Secretary in 2019, I really did it with the conviction that members wanted an even more assertive campaigning union. UCU members, as I said, they have spent their lives in education, most of them one way or another. We're not just motivated by a narrow set of interests like pay or pensions. We're really motivated by social justice issues like climate change. And UCU, we've been leading the way in the UK on climate change in the trade union movement way before other unions got on board. We helped found the Greener Jobs Alliance, the trade union Clear Air Network. Our policies oppose any type of airport expansion or fracking, which is not the case with lots of other unions. We've called for climate justice fund to be established by wealthy polluting nations. And I really firmly believe that UCU reps and members, when they work collaboratively and build solidarity with our students and communities, we can make a real significant contribution towards tackling climate emergency. Because I think the whole experience of whether it's COVID or the last few years, we know that the climate emergency, it has a gendered face. Women are disproportionately the people who are displaced by the climate emergency. And I know that UCU members, care about that. COVID-19, it was a reminder that our existence on Earth is fragile. You know, there's lots of similarities between, I think, the climate crisis and the coronavirus crisis. You know, in both cases, there has been a refusal to listen to scientists, to the academic community, to the wider community of people who are most affected by the crisis. You know, rich nations hoarding reserves, despite the fact this is a crisis that needs to be globally managed. And if we want to create a more just and sustainable world as we emerge out of this crisis, we need that Green New Deal strategy. And it must be founded on acknowledging all of what I've just said, founded on social justice, on workers' rights, and led by trade unions. And I think, you know, I'm really happy to be here in this company today because I think it's an opportunity to form stronger solidarities and rebuild on better foundations.
Great, thank you. Carmela, clearly, you know, what the little I know of your background, climate change is front and center in your life. I'm wondering what role you see for education in the work that you do around climate change where you're located there in the Philippines.
Well, Madeline, my education, what brought me here today, this is that what made me do my work and my passion. So I think growing up in coastal communities, this is from the grassroots level. You know, the life there wasn't really easy, not just financially, but environmentally. Like, you know, these coastal communities are one of the most marginalized communities. And we faced a lot of climate change impacts. We are the most vulnerable and affected. And this is why I see the importance of education. You know, this where it should be, you know, climate change should be discussed from the primary level. Should be discussed, you know, from day to day. It's very important to be aware and you know your situation and what's happening so that you will be also aware what to do. Yeah, and in women, so education and it really, like, they're very interconnected with you know, with climate change. Because I think when girls and women are educated, they have that, they know their choices, especially because from what I observed in my community, most young women, most likely, there are a lot of cases of teenage pregnancy. So this is where education should be, and you know, education and health, reproductive should be discussed also. You know, because when you're educated and, you know, aware of your own body, you have that choice to how many child you should bear or not. And this will also affect, if we saw in a lot of data that population affects greatly or contributes greatly to climate change. And then, well, if we educate our girls and they have that choice to bear a child or not, well, that's contribute to, you know, to increasing population. And I think that's also very important. That, yeah, I think, and that's why education very, very important. And so tackling climate change, and yeah.
Thank you. Thanks. I want to jump a little bit back to you, Joe, in terms of climate change education in the higher ed sector, because we might think that it's something for, you know, primary or even early childhood education. But what would you say about it in your sector in higher education?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. People, you know, tend to think that this is something that would come earlier in educational years, and obviously that is a great place to start as well. But for us, I think, you know, there is a whole way in which higher education, and particularly in the UK, can play really prominent roles. You know, so in the UK, we have over 150, I think it's 157 higher education institutions. So, you know, a university of some sort. And obviously they are huge organizations as well as educational institutions. You know, there's a huge way in which they can help address the climate crisis. So, we are looking at incorporating climate issues and climate justice within the curricula, and obviously that will be alongside sustainable jobs, sustainable careers and workloads, but this can be incorporated into most subjects that you would teach. Research on climate change and adaptations, and how would we look at that in the humanities and social sciences as well as sciences. But then also, if we're just talking about HE, higher education for a moment, how universities procure things, how they actually think about their own footprint within the UK, Europe and globally. Particularly I think COVID has demonstrated that we can do lots of things virtually, that everybody doesn't need to be flying here, there and everywhere all of the time. I think just to say a little bit more about further education, which in the UK tends to be sort of 16 to 18 or vocational and adult education. This is just as vital in an economy like the UK's to put green skills back on the agenda, reskill workers that potentially are going to lose jobs because we want to move away from sectors that are reliant on polluting the earth, retraining people as part of a just transition. But that needs proper investment in education. At the minute, we do not have a friendly government in the UK that is looking at doing that. But I think that both higher and further education can really lead by example in some of those ways.
Great, thank you. And you've touched on this. My last question I'm going to bring to you. Social justice on one hand, gender equality on the other. We need to put them actually in that parallel track. They're intimately related. So I want to ask you, how do you think we can more effectively work on both of those things, make the links between them visible for people who may not see the links, so that we can come towards more holistic solutions? Maybe I can start with you, Carmela.
Yeah, I think here in my country or everywhere, I think providing more opportunities to the youth, and investing more on, let's say, free education to rural communities, especially also because here I'm working with coastal communities, so supporting them and supporting more young girls and women in free education, and also giving them more opportunities in careers in science and conservation, and other related sciences careers, so that so there we've seen a lot of women advancing and doing really great things in science, and leading their communities. So I think if we give more opportunities to them and giving them more support will help us, will help us in finding solutions for and effects of climate change and a lot of coastal communities and other marginalized communities.
Thank you. And you, Jo?
Yeah, I'll try and be quick, because I just wanted to say one thing before I say anything about gender, because I think whenever we're talking about the issue that you raised, I don't think we can ever say this enough. I think in most circles now, it's recognized that we have to address climate emergency as a social justice issue because of the history of colonialism and white imperialism, and acknowledging that they're not just things of the past. And I think a lot of climate activism, has tended to be monopolized by a lot of white Western thinkers and movement and activists. And I think the same is the case with gender as well. We do need to keep highlighting the fact that a majority of these existing jobs in care and education sector, they can and should be green jobs, but that there is, in order to really kind of achieve gender equality, the climate action that we need and the social justice that we need are intrinsically linked. And I think from my perspective, gender equality has undoubtedly been made over recent years, but women still continue to face exclusion, discrimination, disproportionate exposure to socio-economic vulnerabilities. And I think the way in which we start to make that visible, and we are doing this in the UK at the minute in terms of our strike action, is we need to talk about how we have widening and existing gender pay gaps. And climate change is a risk to that. At the same time, addressing gender inequality as part of an integral part of climate action. You know, I mentioned earlier that women are far more likely to be displaced. And we really need to talk about that and how we can promote effective mitigation measures. So naming the problem for what it is. When we're talking about people who are disproportionately affected by the pandemic and climate change, how we're going to create opportunities for them. So women, including young women, young Black, Asian, and other minority ethnic women, disabled women, older women, you know, all who need to or will want to re-enter work, change sector, you know, they need reassurance that they're going to be not just included, but supported in just transition, you know, that they're not just going to be expected to slot into whichever bit of the labour market might make space for them, as so often happens. So really, I think naming the problem, continuing to articulate the problem so that when we're talking through solutions and support in a just transition, these people are front and centred, that they're not just an afterthought. And I think trade unions being led by women, and particularly, I think, women of colour, of which there is not enough of in the UK, at least, that has to be, I think, a real kind of central part of this.
Wow. I just want to thank you both for taking the time to have this conversation, because it's really powerful. You embody and live out exactly all the politics that you've just described and that you fight for, and the changes you want to see in the world. We see them when we look at you. We see them when we listen to you. So thank you. Thank you very much. I want to encourage everybody who's listening, who's watching, to please support the work that Jo Grady and Carmela Elaga are doing where they're located, and to also visit the EI website and support our work on Teach for the Climate. Until next time, bye everyone.